Plan for America podcast is a show dedicated to national unity through prosperity that's achieved by free market capitalism. We believe that a rising tide does lift all boats. This show will be positive, solution-oriented, and nonpartisan. Our only agenda is for the prosperity of our country and her people. All are welcome here. This show will not be argumentative or incendiary, sensational, or polarizing and divisive. What we are presenting is a positive solution to one of America's greatest problems. Hello and welcome to Plan for America podcast, the first episode. We're coming to you from Dynamic Reality Technologies on the campus of Coastal Alabama Community College in Fairhope, Alabama. I'm your host, Eric Nager, and our special guest today is Dr. Kyre Lahtinen, an assistant professor of finance at Wright State University near Dayton, Ohio. Welcome to the show, Kyre.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you. And our first question is if you could just give us a little bit of background on your education, where you came from. I understand you have a PhD from Florida State University, but please fill that in for us.
Yeah. So I've earned my PhD in finance at Florida State University in 2014, and I specialize in behavioral finance and empirical asset pricing. So I do research in that financial space, in particular applying psychology to the financial decision making of individuals.
And from there, your teaching career, you taught for a while at the University of South Alabama, which is where we met you. Where else have you been?
Yep. And then from the University of South Alabama, I recently came up here to Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio, and been mainly teaching investments-related courses and doing research on behavioral and finance and empirical asset pricing.
Well, that's very good. Well, we were sorry to see you leave the area here, but happy to be in touch. We have the technology to do that.
That's right.
And before we get into Plan for America, which is a solution to the debt problems facing our nation, I wanted to see if we could wrap our arms a little bit around the problem, because in the past presidential election, there really wasn't much discussion from either party on debts or deficits. I think a lot of people think of it as out of sight, out of mind. It doesn't seem to be a pressing, immediate problem right now. But the fact of the matter is that the U.S. has about a $27 trillion deficit, and that's not to mention hundreds of trillions of dollars of unfunded liabilities. So let's unpack that a little bit and explain what that means. First of all, what's an unfunded liability?
Well, the federal government has obligation to make certain payments. So we'll talk extensively here about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So those are expected outlays that the government has. Although they don't show up currently on the government's balance sheet, we know that the government must pay those because they've committed to paying them. So them being unfunded essentially means that they don't have a funding source tied to them. So it's a payment the government has to make, but has no way as of yet identified a revenue stream to make those payments.
And that's in addition to the current debt, which is, again, I refer to as over 27 trillion. That's just a function of the government spending more each year than it's taking in revenue. And as I recall seeing for 2020, the government deficit was about 3 trillion, which is about 3 times what it has been averaging because of extra spending for COVID-19 and all that. But those two together are massive amounts. I mean, they're mind-boggling. When you try to think about what a trillion is, we have a little illustration of that. If you can imagine a pallet, or a double pallet actually, stacked 6 feet high of $100 bills. If you had enough of those pilots to cover an entire football field, that would be 1 trillion. And we're talking about hundreds of trillions. So um, how do you help people realize the magnitude of these numbers?
That's the challenging thing is, like you pointed out, I mean, you get above a certain threshold and people can't put that in easy reference to any value. You know, understanding how much a million or a billion is hard enough. So it's really hard. And I think the best way to do that is to translate it into the impact on the individual. So how much an individual will either benefit or suffer potentially based off of this crushing amount of debt and deficit that the government carries. You know, just if we think about in a narrow focus the deficit that runs in the Social Security program, which I'm going to kind of talk about together here as being both the old age and survivorship insurance as well as the disability. That deficit that they're running will exhaust the trust fund, the Social Security trust fund, and that will lead to a 21% reduction in benefits by the year 2035. So when we talk about, like trillions and even tens or hundreds of trillions of dollars, it's hard to bring that back to an individual. But when you say, hey, in 15 years from current funding sources, Social Security is going to have to reduce its benefits by 21% in order to remain solvent. And that I think hits home with individuals because folks that are living on Social Security right now already have a hard enough time making ends meet. And then you say we're going to take a fifth of that away because of what the deficits have done. And I think that's really impactful.
I agree. That is a good illustration. And you talk about the unfunded liabilities. We mentioned Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That collectively counts for, I believe I'm correct in saying, about 70% of government outlays. And that's only growing and squeezing out discretionary spending like national defense or military, other programs. And we happen to be in a time of very low interest rates right now, but if interest rates ever go up and interest on this debt increases, there's going to be hardly any money to spend on anything else. Isn't that right?
Yeah, exactly. So of the overall federal budget, Social Security and Medicare together make about 41% of all federal expenditures. And I and of the non-discretionary, I think it is close to that 70% that you mentioned. It's really just crushing. And over time, that's going to expand. Medicare right now makes up about 3.5% of our GDP. So of the overall production of our nation, 3.5% of that is the cost of Medicare. Well, by the year 2050, that's going to rise all the way to be 6%. So Medicare in particular, as well as Medicaid, they are going to see their costs just explode. So every year that goes by, they will be a larger and larger proportion of what we spend money on. So, you know, that only will exacerbate the problem in terms of how much of our federal budget goes to servicing just that one program. I mean, it will nearly double over the next 30 to 40 years.
And at some point, it may be beyond the ability of the government to pay. So, what does national bankruptcy look like? I mean, that's a scary thought. It seems far off, but as you're pointing out some numbers that are not too far away. 2035, possibly needing to reduce benefits. What does national bankruptcy look like?
Uh, Bankruptcy of a nation is a scary thing to approach. I mean, we've seen this around the world. But if as a nation you go bankrupt, then you no longer have access to international capital markets or credit markets, and so funding dries up. So how do you finance those deficits? Right now, we sell treasuries to folks all around the world because they have faith and trust in the United States government and their ability to repay that debt. I mean, if that goes away, then the funding source dries up. So you lose the ability to fund the debt. And then you start to talk about a lot of very um, I don't know, right now, very controversial ideas about modern modern monetary theory, which basically states that the government should be able to infinitely spend. You monetize the debt, and we're almost being thrust into an experiment of modern monetary theory, MMT, right now, with all of this stimulus that we've had over the last year and what we expect to continue given the situation for COVID. So it certainly launches you into an area of uncertainty, which isn't good for capital markets. It's not good for the stock market. It's not good for employers. It's not good for government. It's not good for international relations. The more uncertainty that you have, and certainly we can cascade that all the way through infrastructure or defense or all of these other programs that the government needs to provide. Um, it it would be a bridge to try and stay as far away from as possible, for sure.
Yet we seem to be accelerating toward it. And of course, more information on the magnitude of this can be found on our website, www.planforamerica.us. Kyre, I think with the case of Social Security, the Social Security has a trust fund right now. And within that trust fund are not any money really. All that's in there right now are non-negotiable government IOUs. So you could kind of make the case that Social Security is insolvent right now because in order to pay current retirees, the government is printing or borrowing money. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's part of the reason why we talk about them as being unfunded liabilities, right? Because if the the way that is structured right now, it's to give the illusion that there are funds in there. And if you go and you look at the Social Security trustees report, they report certain amounts that off the top of my head, I don't have them, but it's about the $200 billion range that they say is in the trust fund. But as you point out, the government is loaning itself that money, and so ultimately, what we want to be able to do is the government's really one entity. The federal government is one entity, and whether or not we try and slice out Social Security or portions of Medicare and Medicaid as being on their own, ultimately the federal government is on the hook and responsible for making those payments. So I don't think that it really matters how much money sits in a bucket that we call the Social Security Trust Fund if the overall federal government is running at massive deficits and is racking up incredible debt. Whatever sits in that trust fund, I mean, if you look at the net worth of the government, I don't know if we can look at it that way, but if you net all of those sources of funds and uses of funds out, then it paints a more comprehensive picture, which isn't good.
I think that does paint a pretty bleak picture of it, unfortunately, and that's the reality of where we are today. There have been some plans that have been proposed that would tweak the current system. In other words, make it last a little longer. For example, raising the retirement age on Social Security or means testing the beneficiaries to see if they're above a certain threshold of wealth. Maybe they wouldn't get as much in benefits. But those are just really kind of band-aids that kick the can down the road, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, precisely. For Social Security, the fix is available. I'll use kind of air quotes on that because you can raise the age, you can reduce benefits, and you could make the equation work. But ultimately, what that means is that there will be reduced benefits for people in the program because you'll be in for a fewer number of years, or you will have a reduced benefit. So they can make it solvent, but it can't keep up with inflation. It can't keep up with the rate that the cost of living changes. Now, Medicare and Medicaid is more difficult.
Yes.
That's where the real problem comes in because traditionally we've spent more on Social Security, but that relationship has changed, and we're going to be spending more on Medicare, Medicaid going forward into the future, and that point happens, that crossover point where we begin to spend more on on Medicare and Medicaid is really only about 10 or 15 years out into the future. So tweaking that is a lot harder, especially as we have an aging population and birth rates are down. So we don't have the rising working population is shrinking, although our retiring population is increasing as the baby boomers retire. So we're on the wrong side of the way this equation should be should be working.
That's right. That's right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back here with Kyre Lahtinen. If you like what you're hearing and want to learn more about Plan for America, visit our website at www.planforamerica.us. There's an extensive Q&A section there, and if you don't see a question you have, then please ask us by email. You can order our book, Plan for America: How to Place the American Dream on a Sure Foundation Forever. That can be found on Amazon.com. You can like us on Facebook. And if you really like what you're hearing, you're welcome to contribute through our website. Plan for America is a nonprofit 501c3 organization, and all contributions are tax deductible. All right, we're back with Dr. Kyre Lahtinen here on Plan for America podcast. He's an assistant professor of finance at Wright State University. That's near Dayton, Ohio. And the first part of the show, we talked about what the problem is. Demographics are certainly part of it, and healthcare is the biggest chunk of that. So how do we solve the problem? Kyre, you have a gift, in my view, for explaining complex things in a very simple way. I remember sitting down with you and you explained how blockchain technology worked for cryptocurrency, for example, and you made it sound so simple. It's like, oh, I get it now. That's how it works. So if someone were to ask you, had no background in any of this, what is Plan for America? What would you say?
Plan for America is the opportunity to use existing funding sources to provide for the retirement and health care of the citizens of the United States of America. And I think mentioning that it's from existing funding sources is a key aspect to point out. It uses what currently gets put into the Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid programs, and instead uses those funds to finance private accounts that are tied to individuals so that they can build for their own retirement. So we don't have to rely on this equation of hoping we have enough workers to cover today's retirees. So the Plan for America is all about letting people provide for their own retirement rather than a complicated system that makes demographics and age and population changes really the secret sauce. So Plan for America is this nice way to let people provide for their own retirement and give that built up value onto their heirs rather than having that value disappear upon their death like it does with Social Security.
So yes, you said many intriguing things there, talking about taking care of it themselves. That implies a certain element of privatization, perhaps. So you're talking about private healthcare, private retirement account. To some people, that might sound scary. You're talking about, assuming then you're talking about maybe the market allowing people to invest their payroll taxes into the market. How do we safeguard that if the market goes down?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question because over the years, that risk that's associated with privatizing Social Security or moving those funds into private accounts, the risk associated with being in the market has been an obstacle. So Plan for America has an incredible feature where it guarantees that an individual will receive a benefit that is at least as large as what they would have received under Social Security. So that guarantee of Plan for America really smooths out that downside risk so that you can participate in the upside of the market while insuring yourself against the downside. And that leads to a follow-up question, I think. How can Plan for America guarantee that someone would receive at least as much as what they would have under Social Security, when a private account that participates in the market can go up and down with the market, just as we've seen over the last year. The volatility has been historic. Well, those private accounts that sit in the PFA, they're charged a 2%, what I will call a management fee, which is typical in asset management to have a fee that's based off of the total assets that are under management, so the value of that account. Now, this fee that is charged goes to provide the funding for the guarantee and becomes available to help offset eventually government debt and provide for a funding source for federal and state governments. So it's an ingenious mechanism where the fee goes into providing that guarantee. Because over the history of the market, we see that we have somewhere around a 9 to 12% return in most years, with some volatility, right? But overall, in the long run, and if you can invest in the long run, then we're going to converge hopefully to that historical average. And so that makes the guarantee solvent based off of that fee that they can that is charged off of the accounts.
Right. And you built a model to support this, to test this. And in the model, we only assumed about a 6.2% return on the market because that's all the Congressional Budget Office allows. But even then, the plan works. So I think depending on what assumptions you make on that market returns, the 2% funding mechanism, like you're talking about, is really the unique feature of this that allows the deficits and debts to actually be paid off and retired and not just kicked down the road. So I believe it's something like somewhere between 2054 and 2071 or something like that. If the plan started right now, that's when the deficits would all be gone. It still seems like a long way off, but at least there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, precisely. And so when I built the model to test this, we use that lower rate because we want to be conservative with our estimates. A model is only as good as the assumptions that you use. And if you use aggressive assumptions, then the outcome is going to look fantastic. And so for the test, or I don't know, maybe we call it a stress test of the Plan for America plan, we started with this 6.2% rate, which is very low in terms of historical market rates, and the plan still works. And so it can give us some confidence that it would be worthwhile to try out and to continue to dig into, and I think has opportunity to gain support amongst a lot of people.
And can you just touch briefly on the healthcare side? We talked about the kind of the retirement side, but there'd also be private accounts created for every U.S. citizen. Can you touch upon that?
Yeah, and so Plan for America pairs, along with this private retirement account, it pairs private health insurance that is funded through the same mechanism. So individuals are responsible for their own health care. If they are unable to afford their own health care, then Plan for America provides interest-free loans for those individuals to pay their healthcare premiums, which we have modeled at about $10,000 per year. And every individual is therefore covered under this private insurance, and it is tied to their own spending. So however much you borrowed is eventually paid off based off of the growth of your own retirement account. Now, that doesn't affect your retirement benefits at all, because that payoff would happen then after an individual has passed. So it's a fantastic way, again, to tie the healthcare cost of an individual to the own funding of that individual. Therefore, you don't have to have this equation between young versus old, working versus retired.
Yes, and my next guest for podcast number 2 is Terry Nager, the architect of the plan. We're going to dive into some more of the details about how it works. But basically, as you said, the health care is provided, and I believe the numbers are anyone who earns less than $40,000 filing singly or 80,000 married filing jointly is eligible for 100% subsidy on the premium. So there's no out-of-pocket costs for that. That makes it truly affordable. And that's, I think, again, one of the features. So what else would you say, I guess, maybe to kind of summarize the plan?
I think those are the two high points. But if I wanted to kind of encapsulate what my view of the philosophy of the plan is it ties back to personal responsibility. So everyone is responsible then for their own retirement and for their own healthcare. And it ties back to universality. So it can apply. The plan is opt-in, but it can apply to everyone. So everyone could receive their healthcare coverage through this mechanism, their private healthcare coverage. Everyone could have a means to provide for their retirement. So it has key aspects which I think are very attractive to people of all political backgrounds or ideologies, because it really supports the individual while also supporting everyone together.
That's great, Kyre. And yes, we want to create unity here. This is, again, as we said in the opening, a nonpartisan show. And I want to rise the tide for everyone, under everyone's boats.
Exactly.
Appreciate you being here. One of the most attractive things, I think, is the legacy that you can leave for your heirs, which, again, as you pointed out, Social Security cannot do. I have a couple quick rapid fire questions for you, Kyre, so we can get to know Kyre the guy. What's been your favorite family vacation? What's your best vacation you've taken with your family?
Well, I would have to say a few years ago we went to Jamaica for a family member's wedding, and so that was fantastic. We stayed with locals rather than staying in resorts, and it was an awesome opportunity to see the island and get to know the people.
Very nice. And if there's one place you could visit you haven't been, where would that be?
One place I could visit that I haven't been, probably Europe. That's a broad place, but there's several cities: Paris, Rome, London that I'd like to go see.
Okay. What's your favorite class to teach as a professor?
I am currently teaching Introduction to Quantitative Finance, which teaches the students we're using Python to code and build quantitative models. And so I absolutely love this class.
Well, it sounds like we got the right guy to build the model for Plan for America. Really appreciate your time today, Kyre. Thank you for being a guest on the show. And we will keep you posted on how everything is going.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
If you like what you're hearing and want to learn more about Plan for America, visit our website at www.planforamerica.us. There's an extensive Q&A section there, and if you don't see a question you have, then please ask us by email. You can order our book, Plan for America: How to Place the American Dream on a Sure Foundation Forever. That can be found on Amazon.com. You can like us on Facebook. And if you really like what you're hearing, you're welcome to contribute through our website. Plan for America is a nonprofit 501c3 organization, and all contributions are tax deductible.